Hey everybody, welcome to episode 39 of LiveCast Conversations with. As always, I'm your host, Gene, the Enjoyment Coach. On today's episode, I have my friend Mike Stanley on. Mike has spent over 20 years as a radio professional that has worked across the British Columbia interior. His adventures started when he moved from Vancouver to Castlegar to take over the commercial writing for the Boundary Kootenay region. He would do whatever was required, including on-air shifts and even covering reception from time to time. In 2006, Mike was awarded the Gold Crystal Award for writing the best ad campaign by a radio station in Canada. In 2007, he made another shift in his career by moving into a sales role, which has allowed him to help small, medium, and large business leaders understand the power of advertising on the radio. Mike and his wife enjoy calling Kelowna home. Mike, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Gene.
Oh, anytime at all. So, a life of radio through Vancouver to Castlegar, now back up into beautiful Kelowna. Tell us, let's start at the beginning. What brought you into the radio world?
Yeah, great question. So it was one of those things. I was a kid growing up in Vancouver, and I think we all get to that point where we don't know what we're going to do for when we grow up, kind of thing. And I, wasn't very good at math, wasn't very good at science, wanted to be a pilot. That was, sort of my ultimate dream. Yeah. And then sort of toiled over what I wanted to do. And I always had great fascination listening to radio and playing contests on radio, and got to know a couple of the guys on CFOX in Vancouver, and started to ask them questions about how to get into the radio industry. And they all said the same thing: go to a school like BCIT or SAIT in Calgary or Ryerson out east. There's all sorts of broadcast schools across the country. And so I did a 2-year program at BCIT from 1999, graduated in 2000. Before my last year was over, I was hired as the creative writer for Boundary Kootenay Radio in beautiful Castlegar, British Columbia. And it offered a radio station, a radio signal from Nelson to a Soyuz, essentially. And so we only had 6 to 8 people that worked there full time. And so when you run a radio station like that, you really end up doing so much more than just your job, just writing commercials or just doing on air. So, by the end, I was writing commercials. I was the afternoon drive host. And did weekend shifts and then answered phones on Wednesday afternoons. So it's you kind of do everything, and you get a flavor for the industry. It's something that doesn't really happen a ton anymore. A lot of those small market stations, they're either owned by somebody bigger that brings people into that, or they're networked. So as an example, we have a station in Trail that a lot of our employees are here in Kelowna.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they no longer have to be in that position with a small team and get a little glimpse of what it's like to go, okay, here's our big goal, and we've only got 7 of us. That means titles be damned. Who can do that?
Right. Yeah, and we have people in our Trail office, like we have a team there, but they're supported by a big group here in Kelowna. So, so when and that was an independent radio station when I was in Castlegar, and really there aren't any anymore, or there's maybe 1 or 2 in the country, but not many.
Oh, wow.
They're all owned by big conglomerates, and you know what? They've done a good job for us. I mean, I've been with Bell for, coming on 15 years, and yeah, it's been a good company for me to work for. So I can't really say that I'm negative about the big conglomerates owning them. It's just different.
Yeah.
So that was sort of Castlegar. I was there for 3.5 years. Really had a good time, made some friends that I'll have for the rest of my life in Castlegar, and probably never would have left, but it's so far from home that I kind of wanted to be a little closer, because I don't know if you've ever been to Castlegar, but it's hard to get out in the winter time. You can't drive, you can't fly because it's called Castlegar for a reason.
Ooh.
And planes don't get in much. And so it's, getting home was tough. So being first time away from home and living in Castlegar was a little far from home. So then moved to Kamloops and did about 1.5 years in Kamloops at Radio NL and the NL Broadcast Group, also an independent station there, and was a writer there. And that's a station where you can take your role, and it's just your role. So I was doing all the, I was a team of, there were 3 of us that were writing for the Kamloops area.
Right.
Then in 2004, moved to Kelowna, take on a writing job here at Bell. At the time, it was Standard Radio. So at the time, it was Sun FM and AM 1150 are the 2 stations we owned. In 2007, we bought Silk FM and turned it into what is now Move Radio. And and then in 2007, my goal originally when I got into broadcast was to sort of make a name for myself in creative and make a name for myself as a writer, and then move into the sales department. So when I won the award in 2006, that was a pretty heavy award. So it was one of those things that I kind of said, okay, that's the notch on the belt, and now it's time to do something new. So then I transferred into the sales department with the same company, and it's been fun ever since.
So do you mind if we step into what was that ad and working through that campaign that won you that Gold Crystal Award?
Sure. So it was an ad campaign for actually Kelowna Self Storage. I'll give them a plug. It's a storage place. They rent storage units, and what we did was we built a campaign that was all based on nursery rhymes. So we had Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, and then it all tied into how Kelowna Self Storage can help, from boxes and tape from your box for your sockses and cape, right? Like you're just trying to make it rhyme. And in fairness, when I first got the idea, I wasn't a fan of it, but then we made it work, and it came out awesome. So it's funny, those first things that you get, and you're sort of like, this isn't going to work at all.
Yeah.
And then you kind of work through it, and you go, oh, actually, that's pretty good.
So what made, a lot of times people will hit those I don't really feel this, and then walk away from a gem, right?
Yeah.
Just because they haven't done the polish work and mining that out.
For
so
sure.
Was there somebody else on your team that's just like, Mike, this is the thing, come on? You're like, nah, it's not the thing, but I need something like this to be the thing.
100%. Yeah. So we had a team of, I think there were 5 writers at the time. And I kind of threw my hands up and, this is going to be terrible. How am I supposed to write this? And had them really kind of jump in and say, Mike, you should give this a whirl. And so we worked with them to, I can't take all the credit because I barely have any. But yeah, it was just one of those moments where the team kind of said, no, I think you can do something with this. And so that was a really cool thing. And I love working as part of a team on stuff like that, because you just never know when you are going to get that gem, as you say.
Yeah. No, it's a bit of a cliche, but teamwork makes the dream work. And sometimes you need somebody else to be that reflection to go, hey, you've got something here, versus whatever imposter type syndromes or things might be going on that blocking you from seeing this brilliance that they may have gone like, whoa, what did you just say there?
Totally. Yeah, 100%. And it was cool because I was put up against people from Calgary and Vancouver, and I beat them. Like that was kind of one of those things that, okay, there was something there. I should have known that from the start. But
and sometimes it takes, hindsight's always 20/20, and it takes sometimes going through that to build that own confidence in yourself, going, oh, wow, we went from something I thought we were going to throw in the garbage can to now all of a sudden we just won across all of Canada with this with these sets of nursery rhymes. Who would have thought?
Totally. Yeah, totally. And that's how it works sometimes.
Yeah.
And, I mean, when you're writing creative, that's the way it goes so often, right? Because you'll put something together that you think is just a gem, and and I'm going to steal your line with a gem, but, you think it's just perfect, and you can't see anything wrong with it. And you send it to the client says, that is garbage. And you're just like, oh, we're so
like, my precious.
Totally, yeah, because you do get attached to it a little bit, right? There, you get to a point where you're like, I love this spot, and I want this to be successful. So let's produce it and make it sound, like it's gonna sing. And then you send it to the client, and they say, no, we don't like it. We'd like, And this was actually the spot I remember most was for a women's clothing store, and it was just raw, but it was classy, and it was just a straight male voice, and it was imagey, I guess is the best way to say it. It painted the picture of the kind of clothing a classy lady would want to wear, kind of thing, to steal a term. But client wanted dresses on sale for 50% off, which is fine, right? But it's just interesting.
So they basically went to you and when comparing it to going to AC/DC, going, I want you to make a great song, but here's the 3 chords you can only play. Only these 3 chords.
And that's part of the gig, right? Because at the end of the day, they're paying the bill.
Yeah.
So if you can guide a client and say, look, I think this is going to be more effective, and here's why, A, B, C, D, as opposed to, what do you think? And they say, I don't like it. But but it happens. But you have to kind of portray that and say, here's why I think it'll work. And the client will say, okay, yeah, I get it, let's go for it. Or they'll say, no, I'd really like our location in there 3 times. And they get caught up on a lot of the jargon, right? Oh, they need to say my name 3 times. And they, I need to have my price in there, and I need to give my phone number. And I mean, phone numbers on radio are just a disaster.
Well, you mean while you're driving, and then you have to try to take it down?
That's it. But you'd be surprised, that conversation comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Well, can we put our phone number in there? And you go, well, here's why that isn't smart to do.
Yeah.
And, especially now with Google and with search engines and all that good stuff. Yeah. Just go to Bing and look it up.
Right? Exactly. Right? Don't waste their time. Make sure you're sticky, and and everything from there. So maybe let's transition a little bit, because obviously everyone maybe this is a wild overgeneralization, but people would compare advertising on the radio to advertising on online as the radio's dead. So why are we putting our money there when we can go spend money and see how many people are clicking and all this other wonderful things and A/B testing? So I would love to hear your perspective, your perspective on that, because you've spoken to it before in some of our conversations that radio is still a rich place to engage your customer base at.
Well, it's interesting, Gene. That's a conversation we have all the time, and it's something that we've had conversations with for 50 years. When 8-track came out, that was going to kill radio. 8-track is just, why would anyone listen to the radio if they have all their music on an 8-track?
Yeah.
And then records came out, and records were, weren't as life-changing as 8-track. But then once tapes came out, and people were making mixtapes, and they could tape it off the radio and do it like that. And they made a song about it. Video killed the radio star, right? It just hasn't happened. And it's interesting, you talk about clicks and all that kind of stuff, but so much of digital advertising, and we do a ton of it as well. We have a whole suite of digital platforms that we can offer, but it's not as intrusive as radio advertising. And that's really the key about radio, is that it is intrusive. It's the same reason that song that you've known since you were a kid, you still know every bloody word to it. But the reason you know every word to it is because of repetition and hearing it and over and over and over. You didn't sit down and memorize those lyrics. So, it's one of those things that the perception is not the reality. And in fact, during the pandemic, we've seen a huge influx of new listeners, and they're not listening in the traditional way, in the sense that they're hopping in their cars and going to work, but people are now investing in smart speakers, and that's really been a driver for our business. Is we're totally smart speaker compatible. Bell owns the iHeartRadio app, and so with iHeartRadio, we're able to stream wherever you want in the world, right? Like if I'm in Thailand, I can still listen to AM 1150 if I wanted to, right? It's so radio's just changed. It's evolved a little bit, and it's become a lot. It's become that persistent advertising avenue, I guess, over the course of 50 years, 100 years, and people are still using it. It's interesting. I was pulling I had a Radio Connects thing, one of the groups that I follow on LinkedIn, and they were talking about Spotify. And I don't know if you saw that I shared that today, but like 86%, and I pulled it up here just so I have it on, but 86% of Canadians aged 16 to 64 listened to AM/FM radio in the past 7 days. 86% of people have listened to AM/FM radio. What does every single car that's sold have? An AM/FM radio.
Yeah.
And people are picky about that. That's something that's high on their list of things that they want in their cars, is AM/FM radio. It's amazing, I mean, that used to be something that we used to say. Yeah. Comes complete. We used to say that in car ads all the time. Comes with AM/FM radio. Holy smokes, that's a great car, right?
Yeah.
But, yeah, so it's changed, it's evolved, and the companies are doing such a strong job of moving into that digital space, and we're starting to see benefits from that. Online streaming has gone through the roof. We're seeing huge influx of people streaming from the iHeartRadio app, right?
Right.
And
so it's the delivery method is changing, but the experience is still there.
Absolutely, 100%. Right. People are always going to need that local flavor, right? They're going to want to know what the weather's going to do tomorrow, or why they're backed up on the bridge, or why they're backed up on Springfield. Anything like that, or why there's police vehicles at Springfield, right? Or whatever. So people are always tuning into that. It also, with a lot of our products, they're news focused too, right? So local news, it comes in a 90-second sort of chunk, whereas you don't have time to sit around and watch an hour worth of TV news at night, right? So you can get all that local content in that 90-minute or 90-second news package, and that's something you just don't get everywhere.
Right.
We used to say, read it tomorrow, see it tonight, or hear it now. And that was our news opener, right?
Yeah.
Because it's immediate, and that's one of the big things that and we see that all the time, but especially in emergency situations. Like you see it in the fires in 2003. That was just a massive undertaking from our station. I wasn't here at the time, but it was a massive undertaking, and we were, in further fires after that, we've had shifts where we actually go in and help answer phones, or run press releases back and forth from the newsroom to the on-air booth, whatever you need. So, it's immediate and it's right there. So you're right. It's just evolved. It's just changed, but it's still super effective.
So making the shift for you from ads into more of a sales role, how has that experience in the past now shaping what you do and how you help these small, medium, and large businesses utilize all the opportunities to be, through the for example, Bell's platform of distribution?
Yeah. So how it's changed is, I was always in sales, right? And even when you're in creative, you're still trying to sell your ideas at the end of the day. So the transition isn't really that much different. It's different for sure, but it's not. You're still talking radio. So you're still talking about why an ad is effective versus why an ad isn't effective. Right. You're still talking about what makes, because there's keys in radio advertising, right? You want your frequency to be enough. So you want your message to be heard enough that it's making an impact, and you want your message to be on point. And what I say when I talk about message, that's your commercial, right? We want that to be on point. And when I say on point, you want it to be, effective in the sense that it's not about me as the business owner. Nobody cares that I have 20 years of radio experience. They want to know how I can help them, right? How I can help them solve their problems. So, so many advertisers, and it happens. Advertisers do it all the time. We have the best customer service. Well, that's one that bugs me, because as a, consumer, I don't go looking for bad service. And if you have bad service, then I'm not going to go there. So telling me you have good service, well, that's pretty much an expectation, right? So, and having 100 combined years of experience in industry XYZ, okay, what have you done for me? Yes. What have you done for me lately, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it has to be about the customer, right? It can't be about the business. And that's, I think, the hardest part of, going from the transition of being a writer, because the sale was already made, right? So when you're having a conversation with a customer, you can sort of say, no, I wouldn't do it that way. Here's how I would do it. Whereas when you're in sales, and you try to avoid this, but inevitably it happens, and the customer says, oh, we have the best customer service. And you kind of, okay, here's why that might not be the best idea, But at the end of the day, there's dollars on the line. So you have a bit more of an attachment to it. So you're kind of playing a little bit of a softer game when you're in the sales team on the sales side, but certainly you're always selling, and you're always selling the idea and how it can work for your business.
Well, I think you've hit on a few things that make me smirk, and almost triggered a little bit when people are like, oh, we've got the best customer service. Be like, you're right, you do, or else you're out of business. End of story. So let's remove those words, and you don't have to pay for them now. And
that's right.
100 years of experience or whatever, like, that's tossed around so often. It's just like, and
it doesn't mean anything.
I don't care as a customer about that. I want to know, can you solve this problem? Here's my problem. Do you understand my problem?
That's right.
We get to that point. Do you understand my problem? And if you do, then maybe I feel like we can move forward a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. And it's no different. My selling is no different than a retail business, right? Yeah. Like, I walk into Andre's as an example, and I need a new TV, but I'll have that conversation and say, well, here's the TV I want, or here's the TV I'm looking for. And they may ask me a question. Oh, can I ask you a question? What kind of room are you working? And all that kind of stuff is what's helping me as the buyer feel more comfortable in making that decision to purchase that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. That comfortability comes down to feeling like, did you solve my problem?
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to make this investment and know that my business will have X multiplier return on that value, right? Because you're asking somebody to part with their hard-earned money with the promise. Basically, anytime you're doing that, you're making that promise, intrinsic promise, going, this money will now turn into more money.
That's
Are you
right.
Excited about that? Yes, cool. Let's do more of that.
That's right. Return on investment is super important in our business, right? That's the core of anything, is what's this going to look like? What makes us successful at the end of the day? And so, yeah.
So how do you deliver on that on like the traditional broadcast, way? Obviously on iHeart, it's a little easier to track some of that. Like, here's the plays and here's the touches or the impressions it's had. But so what's that like? How do you back that up on across everything for what you do?
Yeah, totally valid question. And honestly, that's the hardest part about radio, is that it is hard to track. I always tell the story about we did a survey years, like, this is going back 20 years ago, and it was in Toronto, and we only had run radio ads for people for an offer, and I forget what the offer was, maybe fur coats for $100 or something, right? And so people would phone this 1-800 number, and we'd say, thanks so much for the call. There's no actual offer. Do you mind participating in a survey? People, I'm sure there were some that said no, beat it, and hung up the phone.
Yeah.
But of those people that responded, we asked them how you heard about us. Now, keep in mind, we only did radio advertising. The number one answer was the newspaper. The number two answer was billboards. The number three answer was TV.
Wow.
Radio didn't factor into that at all. So that, all we did was radio. So it's one of those things that it's so hard to track because it just seeps into people's brains.
Right.
So subconsciously. That said, we do actually have a digital program that we can actually monitor your back end of your digital space. So if you're Google AdWords and that kind of stuff, and your website traffic, and we can actually track when your radio ad was heard and compare it to the web traffic at that time.
Okay.
So we can track it,
Yeah.
but it's a tough one for sure. And so much of our, so many of our clients, it's driven to the location, right? Or, come see us, come get your new TV, come get your new, your new hot tub. It's not necessarily go online, although that's where we intentionally drive people, because we want them to be familiar with the name and go to the website and see the brand and that kind of thing.
Right. It's constant. How many touches can this repetitiveness of listening to the radio drive them to the next touch, which is maybe social, maybe it's their website or walking in. That's
right. Yeah, totally. And it's interesting, we had a broadcasters conference probably about 4 years ago, and our program director at the time, we had a panel of millennials and asked them about radio and listening to radio, and I never listened to the radio, and our program director at the time, very insightful at this moment in time, because he asked them if they could name any on-air personalities from our radio stations. And it was really interesting to see that these people said they'd never listened to radio.
Yeah.
But yet they knew who B. Mac and Carly were from the Virgin Morning Show. They knew the contests that they were playing every morning. They knew all the pillars of our programming. So they go back and you go, well, but you guys said you never listened to radio. No, we don't. But you do, unfortunately, or you do really. So it's a funny world, but it's certainly one I believe in. I've been in it since 2000, and it's it works better than just about anything. With digital stuff, I love digital. We have a whole bunch of digital products, but so much of that stuff just and I see it every day. You just fly through it. If an ad pops up, I don't often take action with that.
Right.
So it's just branding, which is good, but the effectiveness is where you really want to check that. And that's, one of the things you can do with that is measuring click-through rates. And, so much stuff is done on impressions, but they don't get the click-through rates. And the national average for click-through rate is 0.1%. Like, it's barely anything.
Yeah.
And that's where we pride ourselves on our digital platforms, because we're seeing click-through rates of like 0.24%.
Right.
But even 0.24% is low. It's not even half a percentage.
It's not. We couldn't even call that a drop to start to put into the bucket. It's a part of a drop that goes into the bucket, right? So
that's right. Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear that it's trying to measure it is all of a sudden becomes really a lot more subjective, considering like radio has been as I think about it, it's been like the medium that's been around the longest over the last 100 years, right? So now it becomes this like almost unconscious thing that people are obviously listening to, but not like consciously like thinking about, I'm going to go turn the radio on.
Totally.
It's like, I'm going to go turn on Spotify. I'm going to go turn on this. Be like, well, the radio is just there. It's part of the background. It's part of that, I'll say noise, but it's just part of life that you don't think about because it's just always been there.
Totally.
And now, especially with the shifting of like being able to get radio on my phone and be able to take it with me.
Well, and that's, it's funny. I just put a radio down. I'm a big radio listener myself, but I just put a radio down on my back deck. I'd been listening to radio off my phone for years because I just didn't have a radio down there. And so I just, I'd stream AM 1150 in the morning every day.
Yeah.
But that seems ridiculous when I can get it on my AM band.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. You brought up an interesting point where you talked about it being in the background. And that's so true. Like, it really is background noise. Yeah. But the funny thing is, like, if you do this, you can't see. But you can't close your ears, unless you're going to sit there like this all day and hum, which is kind of ridiculous. But, they are unavoidable. Even if you're having a conversation with somebody, it's still playing in the background. You may still hear that ad or that song that you recognize that right away it hits you, and you go, and your brain, you don't necessarily consciously say, oh, that's an ad for XYZ. You kind of, it goes there. And then when it's time for you to buy whatever store XYZ sells, you're thinking of them first.
Yeah.
And that's how radio works the best is, it's hard for us to convince somebody they need a hot tub, but it's easy for us to make them think of a company first when it's time to buy that hot tub.
Right.
So, yeah. And, there are really a couple types of listeners. So the background music people, those are passive listeners is what we'd call them. And it's just like you said, in the background, it's on, but they're not really paying attention. Their heads will click up when they hear a song that they like, or, but it's just running through their ears. Yeah. And the brain is catching it for sure. The brain is catching it.
Yeah.
But you're not paying that close attention to it. And then we have the active listener, which is more for the, news talk type programming. And those are going to be people that are, that are paying attention to every word. And right. Because they're either going to make a comment on it, or they're going to write an email about it, or they want to be, educated on it. Right. Or some do anyway.
They want to be part of that. When they're doing that, they're actively being part of that conversation, whereas
100%
being something that's filling in the background in an office situation or on your drive to work or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So what makes in your experience, what makes a good fit? Because for somebody to come to you going, Mike, I think I need to do some radio work. What is that like? If you were to say, here's my top 3 type businesses or industries that are really great for it, what shapes that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's, it's something we've been working on for an ideal client kind of word, or kind of, profile. But really, we deal with all types of businesses in every industry. What I suggest to people is if they have questions, to ask questions. Like, really, it costs nothing to meet with me, and it's not going to be a, you have to do this kind of situation. And I would say all the reps in this town, whether it's working for any of the other stations, are pretty much like that. It's just a conversation. Let's have a conversation and determine if we're fit. We may not be, and that's okay. And one of the things that I try and talk to my clients about is picking the right station because it needs to fit them. It's not about them fitting us, right? It's about us fitting into what they need. So as an example, and this is a great lesson for me anyway, was I had a client last week, and we had a conversation about young males, 18 to 24 males. Well, quite frankly, I don't have a station that fits that brand. So my conversation with him was, yeah, you know what? I probably can't help you, but here's somebody who can at the competing station that is going to be more of a fit for you. Because really, it does me no good to sell that guy a campaign, have it not work, and then he walks away saying, I tried radio once and it didn't work. Yeah. Right? It's not the right way to do things. So we really need to be cognizant about the audience we're trying to target and the audience that fits what your brand is. Because there's so many brands out there that they say, oh, I'm doing radio. Okay, and you sort of start to ask questions and figure out where they're doing radio. And it's great that they're doing radio, but let's try and determine whether they're doing it right, kind of thing.
Right. So
and
takes them
and
right
yes.
back to that return on investment, but as well, like what I'm hearing is like you mentioned it a couple times, is relationships are so critical, and sometimes that's missed in that sales role where people are focused on the transaction, whereas that person that's come and talked to you, you gave them some a dose of reality, going, look, I'm not the right fit. I'll walk you across the street to the guy that I think is right. Like you've now your worth in that relationship has grown with him, wherever that may go down the road, but he's always now going to have a very positive thing, because what happens when he's like talks to his entrepreneur friend that is that right fit, be like, you gotta go talk to Mike. Mike did me a solid. I didn't work with him, but like he introduced me to where now I've had a lot of other success.
Mm-hmm. And that's something I'm trying to create personally, is working with other reps at other stations, and I have good relationships with some of the guys at the other stations, and so it's a free flowing conversation, right? Yeah. So if I meet with you, Gene, and Gene, you say, Mike, this is what I'm looking for, and I said, Gene, that doesn't fit our audience. Here's what our audience looks like. It's, females 18 to 44, females 35, 64, and adults, 25 plus kind of thing. Those would be my three stations, right? But if you're looking for 18 to 24 males, it does me no good to say, oh yeah, I can help you. Come on over.
Like, I'll take your money. Don't worry about it. We gotcha.
And I think that is such an, the transactional thing is such an old school way of selling things. And I hate that term, old school, but, like there was such a pressure back in the day, I think, when it came to sales. So are you ready to make that decision today?
Yeah.
Our conversations never go like that. Yeah. It's either it's going to fit or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, that's okay. But if it does, then great. Here's the next steps of what that needs to look forward to.
Yeah.
But it's, usually when I'm having a meeting with a first client, it's just an exchange of information. I'm going to have a ton of questions, and then I can provide any insight on radio and how radio works as best I can.
Yeah.
But I need to know more about those people's business, that, what they're trying to accomplish. Because as somebody wise once said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
That's a great quote. And it's so true. When you don't understand what your path forward is or what your outcome is, you're right. You kind of squirrel around going, I'm doing things. Be like, well, it's like sitting in a rocking chair. Be like, yeah, it's fun, but it's not getting you anywhere.
That's right. Yeah. And, you can blow your brains out on all sorts of different advertising tools. But if and that's core in any advertising is consistency, right? You can't just do it for an hour and then stop. And that it's like going to the gym, right? You don't go to the gym for an hour and then start selling tickets to the gun show. It takes time, right? It takes time and effort and concentration and focus, and eventually you start to see the results. Radio is no different.
No, it comes down to consistency, and that's like the core of every business. In my field of tech, people always think about, it was overnight success. Be like, that overnight success took like 7 years to become an overnight success. Like, it wasn't an overnight success. You just learned about it now, and now it's popular. That's the difference.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. But certainly a cool industry, and that's where my passion is. It has been for 20 years.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
Well, Mike, remember how I said at the top of this, we'd be like talking along, and I'd be like, hey, by the way, we're past like the 35-minute mark. We've blown past the 35-minute mark, as I expected. So I want to be respectful of your time. I always ask everybody, if we could jump into my time machine, I'm going to pull you in. We're going to go back 10 years. We're going to fling open the door, and you get to tell that younger Mike one piece of advice. What would it be, and why?
Do something fun with your hair while you still can.
All right, we'll do two.
It's so funny. It's persistence. Stick with it. I think 10 years ago, I was still very new to the sales department and wondering if I was going to make it, or if this was going to be something that I was good at, or if I would, end up delivering newspapers or whatever, right? Whatever I had to do. But as it turns out, I think I'm pretty good. So but that was probably took me 4 years to finally feel comfortable on my feet.
Right.
and, comfortable having even this type of conversation where, we're talking about radio, and it's like, well, I think I can say this. Now I know about it, and I'm confident enough to say, here's why, here's X, Y, Z. But that would be my big advice, is just stick with it. You're going to be just fine.
I love it. So persistence is key. That's the big key.
Totally.
That's great, Mike. So again, thank you so much for being on episode 39. This has been a blast, and some really good information about the power of radio and what can actually be done with it. So I really appreciate your take on it, and you jumping into this conversation. I'm glad I get
the opportunity.
Mike that's comfortable doing that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you want to do this, I'm happy to.
All right. Well, I look forward to future conversations, my friend.
Sounds great.
So everybody else, thank you for watching today. Really appreciate it. And remember, find one thing to be persistent with this week. All right. Till next week. We'll talk to you later.